Hi, and welcome to the X22 Report Spotlight. Today's guest is David Robertson. David is a researcher and a writer. He has a book out called Reloaded, An American Warning. He is also the founder of AnAmericanWarning.com. He does podcasts every Tuesday and Thursday between 7 and 7:30. And I am very happy to have him on the X22 Report Spotlight. David, welcome to the Spotlight.
Thanks for having me, Dave. I appreciate that.
Thanks for being on here. And I want to refer to your book, An American Warning. And I went through your book, and I see you're talking about the rights of the people, the Constitution, our government. And the first question I have for you, when you look at our government today, do you believe that this government today that we have is out of control?
Absolutely. In a lot of different regards. We look at, for instance, constitutionally authorized function. And in that regard, we have to understand that our current government isn't following any sort of constitutionally authorized function unless it fits some sort of agenda. And that seems to be, fluid, temporary, which is unfortunate. But even down to the way they approach things. For instance, just recently we saw that Obama unilaterally attempted to ratify that Paris Climate Accord without Senate approval. I mean, clearly that is a violation of the Constitution. And this list, that's just a recent example, but that list is very long and complete, not only violation of the Constitution, but in complete disregard to the people's power.
So let me ask you this. Why do you think the government is overreaching right now? I mean, what's your opinion on that?
I would imagine it's a couple different things. One, because the people in mass, I think, are ignorant of their responsibility, and a lot of that has to do with education, which could also be pointed towards government. But people have kind of lost touch with their power. One of the things that we often hear is that my vote doesn't count, or things along that line. And I think, again, that kind of illustrates the point that people have lost touch with their responsibility and the power that the individual has, let alone groups. We also believe that, for instance, the federal government has the power or the strongest power, which, again, is just not true. A lot of the power does come locally. It comes on not only in the community, county level, but also the state. And people should embrace that. But unfortunately, because of education or a lack thereof, things like the 9th and 10th Amendment are completely forgotten.
Yeah, and what's funny is that when you were talking about Obama and him, kind of going around Congress, we've seen this a lot with the Second Amendment, with gun control, where he continually writes these executive orders where he's trying to go around Congress. I know there's a couple of bills in Congress right now where they're trying to push them. There's gun legislation. And I also know we have the UN Arms Treaty where John Kerry has already signed it, and we know that they would love to get that through the Senate, and we know the president would sign it no problem.
Sure.
But
and what's interesting about that is, again, people, and I continue to point a finger at education, people no longer live by definition. A lot of people are worried about, licenses or registrations and stuff like that. Well, if you look at the definition of license or permit, by definition, it's official permission for something that would otherwise be illegal. And we know that we have an unalienable right, which, an unalienable right is something that cannot be licensed, adjusted, altered, traded, or taken away in the Second Amendment. So if that cannot be licensed, adjusted, altered, or traded, or taken away, why do we allow ourselves to get official permission for something that is clearly legal in regard to the Constitution? And this ignorance allows us to perpetuate the perception that the federal government has the power that it does, when the reality is that the people are supposed to have the power, but that's not being taught. And so, that's where we get somebody who feels like they can bypass constitutionally authorized function and sign accords treaties or bills, laws that somehow restrict our rights, be it the Second Amendment, the First, the Fourth, the Fifth, whatever.
But we do see the government continually violating our rights. They with search and seizure, with the no-knock raids, with police stopping you and searching your vehicle. I mean, all of this is a violation. With the NSA admitting that, yes, they do spy on the American people. They look at your email. They look at your text. They look at pretty much everything. They're really out there admitting that, yes, we do look at all of this, and we're violating your Fourth Amendment. We're violating your Second Amendment. We're violating your First Amendment. And the people, the way I see it, and maybe you have a different opinion, but the way I see it, the people are just sitting back and letting the government do this.
It's true. But in Reloaded, I talk about and I demonstrate, I provide 2 or 3 examples for every right in the Bill of Rights. There is not a single right in the Bill of Rights that's not being completely infringed upon. But again, here's something that I tell a lot of law enforcement and military personnel every time I have that conversation. I'll ask them a general question. What's Article 4, Section 4? What's the 8th Amendment? What's the 7th Amendment? And of course, the standard reaction is, I don't know. Well, my question, not only to military and law enforcement, but to also anybody who is going to exercise any kind of power in this republic, is how can you support, defend, or pledge allegiance to a document you do not know? Our responsibility individually is to understand what our power is if we aim to exercise that power. Of course, that's where the rub comes. You'll see a lot of videos on YouTube and a lot of these other video social media sites where you'll see somebody who knows their rights or believes that they know their rights and will somehow have a confrontation with law enforcement officials or what have you. And that's where that rub comes in, because usually one party doesn't know and the other party has either some knowledge or a vague understanding of it. But as a community, as a nation, as a state, as a sovereign people, we have to know what our power is. And a lot of that has to do with understanding words like unalienable, reading and understanding our rights. You can't support or exercise a right you do not know. Therefore, if it is infringed upon and the federal government or anybody says, well, we're doing this for your safety, the ignorant are much easier led. Therefore, it's our task, our job to eliminate that ignorance. And we do that by investing the time and understanding that document. By the way, that document's a very short one.
Yeah.
It's about the size of a short story. So, call it bathroom reading material if you have to, but I think it's important that we do that.
Let me ask you this. So we're talking about the people's rights. We're talking about the government violating the people's rights. Why is there such a push for the government to remove the weapons from the people? Why are they making such a strong case right now?
Well, of course, they'll tell you it's for your safety.
They always do that.
Right, it's your safety. But we're turning into a nanny state. Here's the situation. Why do law enforcement officers have firearms? Why do military have firearms? And why are they always trying to get the better types of firearms, the more efficient firearms? Because it makes them a powerful weapon. It's a lot harder to infringe upon rights or to seize power or to force unconstitutional mandate when you have an armed, educated populace. And the founders knew this, and they said this repeatedly in numerous different ways and in numerous different documents. Of course, these documents are also not taught in high school or in grade school. You can find that information in your higher level courses in regard to college, especially in your advanced degrees, if you seek that information out. But the vast majority of the people are not in advanced degree programs. The vast majority of the people are high school or less. Therefore, the ignorant masses prevail. It's easier to lead and or seize power. Power is not created, it is exchanged. And that's, I think, something that's very important for us to realize.
A population that has weapons, is the government afraid of that?
I think our current government is, absolutely. I think that is evident by things like the MIAC report and the Virginia Terrorism Threat Assessments, DHS Terrorism Threat Assessment, and so on. I don't think traditionally that was the case. Obviously, our founders thought that an armed populace was a peaceful one, but governments, for the most part, are. You look at situations throughout history where you had an armed populace that were able to make change. Yeah, if you're seeking to retain your power structure, the last thing in the world that you want is either an educated or an armed populace, or even worse, an armed populace led by an educated and knowledgeable leader. That's actually right there one of the most dangerous scenarios you can have.
I just want to stay on the subject for one more second.
Sure.
When we talk about the Second Amendment, the government continually puts out the idea that it's for hunting, that it's just for militia. Actually, in the Common Core, it seems like they're rewriting a lot of the rights. They're shortening them, abbreviating them, putting a spin on them. And I see what they're doing. They're teaching our young to think that, oh, look, you really don't have these rights. This is what it really means. And I can see already that they're trying to teach them that they're privileges. They're not rights that you're born with. What is the Second Amendment? Is it for hunting? Is it just for militias?
Absolutely not. Here's the thing, and this is what, again, education, but everybody in the United States of America, every American citizen, is a defender of not only their own personal sovereignty, but their community's sovereignty, their state sovereignty, and of course, national above that, and usually in that order. When our founders were around, hunting was what they did. They didn't go to the grocery store. They didn't have, cow mills and all these other things going on. Hunting and farming was a part of their everyday life. That was commonplace. It did not need to be delineated that, hey, you can go ahead and feed yourself. I mean, that would be a ridiculous notion. We had a situation with an overbearing authoritarian government, and it was made absolutely and abundantly clear that the reason for the Second Amendment was to protect ourselves for the security of a free state. If you want a free state, this is what it's for. And it's funny because a lot of people, well, we should limit this, we should do this. Well, the limitation was actually written into the Second Amendment in the words keep and bear. If you look at the definitions of those words, again, living by definition, we understand that it's what you can carry on your person. You have to understand the verbiage and the definitions of that time. It's an interesting story about Webster, who actually got involved with writing a dictionary for this effort. But it's what you can carry on your person. And this was seen, and the reason for it was seen and reiterated numerous times, even through Andrew Jackson. Well, even further beyond that, I mean, you can go back into Lincoln, and even still recently, as recent as what was it, just a year or two ago, a district court judge appointed by Bill Clinton, said that you can't actually exercise your right to keep and bear arms without actually owning one. And the funny thing is that when you look at the weaponry of that time, there were assault weapons. They encouraged you to own cannons if you could afford them. In fact, to the point to where during Andrew Jackson's time, when he was dealing with his battles, he actually had to recruit pirates because pirates had their cannons and they had all the things that were eventually sold off to the criminals. So, no, the idea that it's for hunting or for sport is asinine, to say the least. Clearly, it is for the security of a free state, and clearly, it is in defense of sovereignty against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I mean, that's abundantly clear. And I think that, in fact, I dedicated an entire chapter to the Second Amendment, trying to delineate and disprove all of the things that have basically been, lied about in regard to the Second Amendment.
So let's take everything that we just said and look at the country as a whole. We're seeing a lot of police activity where they're being very violent against the people. Are we headed into some type of police state right now? Why are we seeing this violence against everyday people?
Well, all right, let's start with police state for a second. A police
Okay.
state, by definition, is a totalitarian state controlled by a political police force that secretly supervises the citizens' activities. The question we have to ask now is, do we have that? I would say that we do. I would say that we do in a lot of different ways. I would say that we do in numerous different levels. And let's also think, too, about some of the basic laws that are put in place that are in direct violation of personal liberty. A simple one would be like seatbelt laws. Oh, they're here to protect us and blah, 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 blah. Perhaps, but I can still get on a motorcycle in my state without a helmet and fly down the road, and nobody says a thing. But if I'm not wearing a seatbelt, I can be driving down the road and get pulled over and taxed for it. And you'll notice, too, that I don't say fine, I don't say a ticket, I say tax. As we've seen the nation over, a lot of these arbitrary laws are put in place, and we have seen people whistleblow the idea that the quotas and things like that are put in place to collect certain revenues. I've actually had on some of the shows and stuff that I've been on, law enforcement officials flat out say that they have been told, we're going to pass this law because we need to generate some revenue for such and such a program. So absolutely, police state in all sense. We are, of course, we could talk about totalitarianism as it relates to authoritarianism versus the oligarchy. Well, an oligarchy in its primal form and in practice is really no different than a dictatorship, which is, of course, authoritarianism. And it's not even me talking about the oligarchy. That has been proven in academia. So, yes, by definition alone, not to mention in practice, yes, we are definitely in a police state, and it's unfortunate. Because again, these people have sworn an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, but yet they are ignorant of the document that they've sworn to uphold and defend, and they are in practice, proactively in violation of it on a daily basis.
There's a lot of talk about the federal government trying to federalize the local police with grants, federal money. And we can see that the police are getting a lot of military equipment, surveillance, tanks. I mean, I live in a very small town, and I can't even believe that we actually have one of those tanks. Actually, it was sitting in front of an elementary school, so the kids could see it, which I think is absolutely ridiculous because there's very, very little crime here. And it's unbelievable that, these local police are getting this type of equipment. What in the world are they expecting to have? I mean, what I see. I mean, I'm looking at this tank. It has a gun turret on top, and it's just, what are they expecting to happen?
Well, and I referenced this a little earlier, when we look at the MIAC report, when we look at the Virginia Terrorism Threat Assessment or the Department of Homeland Security's Terrorism Threat Assessment, we see very clearly that they see the American people as a threat, specifically those who believe in popular sovereignty, constitutionalism, things of that nature. But then again, we have to also understand, too, that there's been an agenda at play over on the other side. So, yeah, fear, rule by fear, kind of an iron fist, if you will. But one of the things that we also need to throw into that mix is the difference between a police officer and a sheriff. It's interesting. A lot of people don't question how police are put into place or what their job is. And I often try to tell people, look, the highest authority, law enforcement authority in your county is your sheriff. And even the police, for the most part, depending on the state, I believe, have to swear an oath to the sheriff. Let's also look at this. What do police do? They control bylaws, right? Codes. They do overlap into some what I would call universal law, but a sheriff, for instance, I apologize for the brashness of the following statement here, but I think it proves the point. If you're in your city, more than likely, you've got laws against public urination. But so if you happen to urinate in a public space in the city, you might get arrested or fined for it. But if you're out in the county and the sheriff comes by and you're urinating on a tree, he's likely to wave at you because
Yeah.
We're starting to get into constitutional law. And in constitutional law, the way it's really set up is that if there is no victim, there is no crime, essentially. You do whatever it is that you want to do. I'll do whatever it is that I want to do. And as long as I don't infringe upon your rights or you don't infringe upon mine, we're good. And we can have commerce and everything's fine. But when we start delineating certain codes, bylaws, and things like that to participate in this certain city or township, all of a sudden we're going to get taxed like crazy for that participation. And, I don't know if that necessarily answers the question, but, as we're seeing this evolve, this federalization, we're witnessing an undermining of local police. And then we've seen this numerous times in regard to people funding certain riots or demonstrations, and nobody's going after the people funding them, but yet the local PD is overloaded, and the feds or the state are looking at that saying, see, you can't handle your business, so we need to do this. Here's the problem, here's the result, let me create the problem. And we're seeing this time and time again, but again, nobody's wanting to tear this apart. We have, and this is a statistical fact, the vast majority of the people now have the attention span shorter than a goldfish. Mm-hmm. So we're watching the news, we're being fed all this stuff, plus factor in the Google effect. It's very easy for people to forget or to want to research or to really examine. We're just going to listen to what the media tells us and then move on.
It's very interesting. They keep telling us that there's terrorism all over the place. And I do believe their message continually gets mixed up because they're telling us, like in San Bernardino and in other areas or Orlando, someone came in and they shot up the place. And first they come out, it's terrorism, he's radicalized or whatever. And then they tell us that to keep you safe, we need to take your weapons away. Well, wouldn't it make more sense to give every single person a weapon? I mean, think about it. If that person who was doing that act walked into an area and everyone was packing, would that person open fire? Because they would be like 50 guns pointing at this one person. So when I see these events, I see them and I say, wow, their message is really mixed up. I mean, people are really going along with this, take away your weapons, we'll protect you. Well, you didn't protect the people in the club. You didn't protect these people. So how possibly can the government protect us?
The government can't protect you. We also have to remember, too, that in regard to police, they do not preempt anything. They always respond. Mm-hmm. When a shooting happens, they show up later. So people are already hurt, people are already dead, and then they're going to show up and do it. They cannot protect you. Statistically speaking, you are your best defense, period. And we see this time and time again. When was the last time we saw some sort of mass shooting at a gun show? Doesn't happen. But anywhere they take away firearms, we see these problems. The thing we also have to factor in is our basic human nature. We have something called fight or flight. We want to protect ourselves, self-preservation. Somebody wants to accomplish a mission. He wants to be able to do it. He or she wants to do it in the most effective way possible. You're not going to walk into a place that's automatically going to defeat your mission. So it's very simple, but I think it's been overcomplicated. When we look at national statistics, you factor in all the guns, all the people, all the crime. Over 99% of all firearm owners have never done anything wrong ever in regard to firearms crimes. And it's actually higher than 99%. So why are we going to punish the vast majority of the people for the mistakes or atrocities of one? It doesn't make sense. And it's honestly unconstitutional as well. So,
do you feel that we are facing the same exact problem as our founding fathers?
In many ways, I do. From the list provided by guys like Franklin and Jefferson. If you look at the Declaration of Independence, for instance, one of the coolest exercises I invite anybody to do. Everybody knows the preamble, but if you look at the long list provided in the Declaration of Independence and look at it objectively, you'll see that the vast majority of the things that they listed are the things that we are in fact dealing with today. Even down to, and you can expand upon it, things in regard to corrupt corporation, overbearing and manipulative banks, and so on and so forth. But down to the oligarchy and how they are approaching the people in general, absolutely. And in fact, in Reloaded, I also give an interpretation. I wrote out an interpretation of the Bill of Rights in modern words, so that way it's not missed. So it's absolutely. The list minus maybe a couple of points is pretty much where we're at in regard to where our founders were. But one of the other things that we have to understand too is that history is cyclical. There are cycles that we are subject to. In fact, another one of the things, and you'll see this in the book as well, where I was able to basically pinpoint the economic upheaval in a coming war because of the cycles at play. History does repeat itself with mathematic precision. We just have to look at it objectively to understand what that means.
So when you say cyclical and you're talking about the economy and war, you're saying the upcoming economic problem and an upcoming war that is approaching?
Absolutely.
So you do believe that we're going to have some type of economic problem in this country?
Absolutely. One of the things that I do, I analyze financial elements in regard to economic trends, GDP, so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. And in fact, I released a 2016 mid-year economic update what was it, last month before, and basically showed projection in regard to where the trends are. For instance, and kind of expose some of the lies that we're being told. Right now, for instance, we're being told that the housing market's booming, everything's great. Well, housing ownership's actually the worst it's been in over 40 years. So when we look at the reality of the situation and then, of course, apply history to it, we start to see a couple of interesting trends. One of the things that I've been able to pull out is a 60-10-10 split in regard to those cycles. For instance, the Currency Act and Industrial Revolution into the Revolutionary War. Then, of course, a lull. And then, of course, the switch from canals into railroad technology, things of that nature, into the Civil War, then a lull. Then, of course, the economic manipulations, Black Friday, Great Depression into World War II, and then a lull. And then we start looking at, like, for instance, 2007, 2008, and then follow projection into where we are now. One of the things that came out by Hugh the other day was that, look, when trade starts to break down, wars begin. And now we're starting to see not only a dollar issue, we're seeing an inflationary issue, we're seeing a bank issue, we're seeing a debt issue, a GDP issue, an unemployment issue, although I know the mainstream media would like to continue to quote U3 numbers, which is unfortunate. But when we look at the real numbers in correlation to, for instance, say participation rates, we're starting to see a horrible economic trend. In fact, the central banks recently just said that they're pretty much running out of options, and they're looking to governments to try and fill that void. Well, look at what's going on now. We're starting to see China and Russia and Iran and everybody start to work together. NATO's been, saying, look, we've got some massive issues. And what's interesting is, when I started talking about this was in 2004, and pretty much the vast majority of the things in that regard have come to pass. Not because I'm a soothsayer by any stretch, but it's just it's basic math.
So, do you think, looking back out of everything that we said, do you think because of the economy breaking down, the system breaking down, the government is out of control? And as they can see everything continually deteriorate, they're saying to themselves, okay, we're going to have, maybe riots. Maybe we're going to have people who are going to try to get rid of us. Do you think this is why we see what is happening in the government right now, where they're trying to take away weapons, they're trying to control the people, control your thoughts? They're just trying to keep control of their position because of what is happening in the economy?
That's going to play a part in it. But what we're starting to see, I think, the world over, is this divide between popular sovereignty and globalism. There are two basically schools of thought, and then you start getting into Keynesian economics and so on and so forth. But essentially, I mean, if we're really going to try and boil it down into simplicity, you have two schools of thought. You have this globalist, interconnected thought process, and then you have the popular sovereignty process, where we can exchange, we can have commerce, but essentially, I want to do what I want to do. I want to be in control of my destiny. I don't want to have state control of my innovation or what have you. And we're starting to see this. I think Brexit is a really good example of that. In a lot of ways, this election is a really good example of that. Not even so much the candidates, but the division of the people. We're starting to see that divide. It's becoming a lot more apparent. And unfortunately, what we're seeing, and I think this is a part of it too, is that the numbers are pretty much up the middle when you look at it in the grand scheme of things. Unfortunately, when you have a 50-50 split like that, one side's got to give. There's going to be that rub as one side's trying to push for that dominance. And, this was stuff that, they've seen coming for a long time. I think a lot of people have seen it coming for a long time in regard to those who research and definitely in academia. So absolutely, you see strife down the road, you want to prepare for it accordingly. But that's also, too, I think, probably the best advice for anybody who is reviewing any of this information. I mean, we're seeing state and even federal governments, independent agencies and stuff like that saying, prepare for disaster. We're seeing that all across the board. Germany just last week said, hey, you know what, natural disaster, war, whatever it is, you should be prepared. At least have 10 days worth of food, at least do this. And I think that's probably the greatest advice ever.
So you mentioned elections, and I just want to ask you a question. We know this powers that be, they want it to go their way. Sure. They have a candidate in mind. I don't really care, between the two candidates. It makes no difference to me, as long as they work for the people. And my whole take is, if the central bank is in power, they're running the show. It's the shadow government, the elite, whatever people like to call them. If the election doesn't go the way they want, do you think there could be some type of an event? Do you think they might postpone the elections? What do you think might happen during this period?
That's a really good question. There's a lot of variables at play here. What they've also determined too is that if one of the candidates die, it might even suspend the election altogether, which creates a couple of issues, especially in regard to, say, for instance, Hillary's health or the boldness of, say, Trump. Both are creating or have created a lot of enemies. So there's that. There's the fact that it may not matter anyway, regardless of who's in power. We've got a situation where the yuan is going to be included into the global basket of currencies. And nations are already and have been for a while trying to dump the dollar as best they can to jump on board with, like, say, the BRICS or the AIIB. China and Russia are making a power play as we speak. And we're starting to see a lot of that unfold. The dollar is going to be decimated. Our economy is going to be trashed. So, there's a lot of factors coming into play here. How the election unfolds and the aftermath of it, I think, depends a lot on what's going to happen externally just as much as internally. Regardless of who wins the election, provided the election does go, which I would imagine it will, a lot of people are going to be angry anyway. Mm-hmm. So we're going to see some, probably domestic strife, as we have been seeing, but I think it's going to be elevated. We've got a couple of situations at hand, and we have to, again, look at it as a bigger picture, not as an individual piece. We're headed for some rough times, I think, no matter what.
And you're mentioning rough times, and you mentioned war before. How does war fit into this? Why do you think? I mean, we're seeing a lot of U.S. provoking around the world right now. I mean, we see it in the South China Sea. We see it. I mean, the Middle East is a complete mess. We see it in Eastern Europe with the NATO buildup of military assets and troops. We see, on the corporate media, they just continually mention Russian aggression, and they're continually building this up. Why do they want war? What benefit would that give them?
There's a lot of benefits from war. Going back to Thomas Paine, Thomas Paine mentioned how it's not taxes that are a result of war, but that war is a result of taxes. Basically, power and influence. Of course, it's great for economy. It's great for revenue. Any kind of sustained war can be argued in great part that World War II is what pulled the United States out of the Depression. So it's good business. And there's a lot of other things that come. That's unfortunate, but it's true. And the whole world now is dealing with a debt crisis. So the whole world is very interested in trying to fix this. We also have, depending on who you want to listen to, population issues, sickness issues, disease. Just overall, you look at some of the rhetoric from people like, say, again, the elite, who talk about overpopulation and wanting to depopulate, and it's okay if massive swaths of people die. It plays into it a lot of ways. Not to mention the fact, you were talking about manipulation into other nations. You look at like Venezuela, look at Iran. Nobody wanted to question. Well, I shouldn't say nobody, but quite a few people didn't want to question. For instance, the 1.7 billion handed over to Iran recently. What are they going to do with that? Look at their threats. Look at their rhetoric. What do you think they're going to do with that? Look at their affiliation with, say, for instance, Russia, Bashar al-Assad. Look at the triumvirate there. Look at Turkey. Look at China, North Korea, Venezuela for a great portion, not to mention a lot of other South American countries. You look at kind of this divide, this geopolitical divide, and we start to see that difference of manipulation versus leave me alone kind of a thing. And people are upset all over the world, not just at the United States, but also the debt, also the poverty, all of these things. Tensions are rising accordingly. And, I think that it's just a result, again, not only to mention the cycles of it, but, just even basic logic and cause and effect in that regard. Russia is powering up for a war. China is powering up for a war. They've been saying it for a while. In fact, even some of our own military, former military leaders have now within the last week said that war with these people are inevitable. So to me, it's not even a question of if, it's a matter of when. When is going to be the ideal time to do it? How it's going to play out. And according to my models, it shows four major sections. It shows the Baltics, it shows the Middle East in through the Horn of Africa, the South Pacific, and then eventually the United States itself.
Wrapping all of this up, I think it was Thomas Jefferson who said that I've given you this freedom and you're going to have to fight for this freedom once again. And I believe he thought the freedom will last about 100 years or so. But I think we've gone further than that. Do you think right now the people will have the ability to fight for their freedom once again?
I do. And I think that's a historical norm. I think people, once they get a taste of freedom, they want to retain it. I don't think that people in this country today are free. We talk about the land of the free, home of the brave. I would like examples of that. Again, our entire Bill of Rights is entirely infringed upon, and nobody's being brave enough to stand up and do anything about it. There's been talk of Article 5s, overthrowing the government, things of that nature. But I often use this example as a retort, that it would be like trying to learn to fly in a dark basement using a washing machine. You cannot, and this goes back to what we were talking about originally, you cannot support and defend or exercise or anything in regard to your power, things you do not know or do not understand. There will come a time when that type of action will occur. Again, that's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. There has yet to be a nation in the world that has not collapsed at some point in time. And for instance, I mean, you look at fiat currencies. There has yet to be a fiat currency on the planet that hasn't destroyed itself and ripped its economy along with it. And sometimes, of course, that nation that holds it. But you have to be knowledgeable about what it is you are fighting. A lot of people, for instance, will tell you that we live in a democracy. That is 100% inaccurate. Article 4, Section 4 states clearly that we're a republic. But ask somebody the difference between a republic and a democracy, you'd be hard-pressed for a straightforward answer. The time, and I would say the time should have been started a long time ago, but is to re-educate ourselves about what it is that we want, what it is that we believe in, and what it is that our founders fought so hard for. But there's also, too, we talk about education, this undermining of what the founding fathers stood for. I've seen in the last year numerous stories and articles and statements in regard to how our founders were racist bigots, define irony. When the truth of the matter is nothing could be further from the truth. Most of our founders were abolitionists, and they were able to defeat a system that had been in place for thousands of years in under 74. That's amazing. And nobody looks at it that way because we're not told to look at it that way. We talk about, the strife within our population. We're talking about reparations and stuff like that, but nobody wants to look at the fact that a good portion of whites would actually be subject and privy to reparations if they were enacted. History again, and it's funny. So again, knowledge is power, and I'm a big believer in that. And so that's one of the things that I like to do is spread knowledge, or at least a perspective to consider. So,
David, thank you very much for being on the X22 Report Spotlight. Once again, how can people see your work? And just give them your website URL.
Sure, in AmericanWarning.com, AmericanWarning.com.
And they can see your podcast every Tuesday and Thursday between 7 and 7:30.
That's right. We're live between 7. It's actually an hour long. We start at somewhere either around 7 or 7:30. But it's available on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Player FM. We run a live chat over on YouTube, so they can be a part of the conversations and mingling and interacting with others over there. So, all right. Of course, we're on social media as well. So seek us out there.
David, once again, thank you very much for being on the X22 Report Spotlight.
Thank you, Dave.